Thank you all for being here and joining us tonight. We're so excited to welcome Susan Kaiser Greenland to Paw Paw District Library. I'll read a quick bio about Susan and then we'll go ahead and get things started. So Susan is a mindfulness educator and best-selling author, specializing in distilling global wisdom traditions and scientific research into straightforward everyday practices. In the early 2000s, she helped pioneer the introduction of secular mindfulness into classrooms through her Inner Kids model. After decades of working with children and adults and writing two widely translated books, Susan's latest work has culminated in a new book called Real World Enlightenment. And her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, and CNN. Please join me in welcoming Susan.
Thank you, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for hosting this event. I know it's tough on a evening, especially with the daylight savings time, to come out, so I appreciate it.
Okay, Susan, so we have some questions for you. So I'll go ahead and I'll start with the first one. What prompted you to write Real World Enlightenment and take your writing talents in a different direction from your previous work with children and families?
Well, the work with kids and families was the very beginning. And then I started working in schools and clinics and training adults how to work with kids and families. So I was still training adults, but I was training them about working with kids. And from the very beginning of this work, I really saw tremendous commonality among the various traditions that do contemplation and reflection, the wisdom traditions. And I just saw that there was so much more in common than people had differences. And what so many people had told me and what the research had shown is that there are these universal themes, they call them golden threads, like appreciation and interdependence and kindness and compassion. And those weave through all of the wisdom traditions. They're not unique to any one of them. And I, from the beginning, included all with the work with kids these basic human values and these elements of all of the different traditions. So I felt that this was the last piece of the writing that I wanted to do about the Inner Kids model. So that's how the book came about.
And you mentioned playfulness in the book. And how did this theme emerge as critical for you?
Well, it started because, for the first 10 or so years, I just worked with kids and I loved every minute of it. And I see some school teachers in that audience out there, including my sister. And I know that you guys know, as well as parents and grandparents, that you're not going to get too far with kids if you don't include play and fun. So I started working with the kids and always used a sequence of play, practice, whatever was the, kind of the building, the muscle building or the tool building work, and then share, talk about it, and talk about how this could apply to real life. But what I found with all of the work I did with kids, ever since the beginning, is that parents and teachers and administrators and clinicians would come and say, "Hey, I want you to help the kids. I have to go and grade some papers, but if you can work with the kids, that would be great." And all of that was fine, but it's a little different what happens when the adults start doing this work too. So many of the adults came and said, "Hey, I can't meditate, I can't pray, I can't really just still and quiet my mind and body." But when they started playing mindful games with their kids, because they thought it'd help their kids, because caregivers will do anything for their kids, even something as nutty as mindfulness. So when they thought that actual mindfulness would help their kids, they would play the mindful games, and then they'd come back and say, "Hey, I kind of get this." Because they had played first, they did some play, they had some fun, and then they came to the practice with more of a open kind of mind and attitude. So that's why playfulness was important and how it got woven through absolutely everything now that I do with kids and families.
There's a quote in your book, don't play the end of the scene before you get there. And it's a powerful slogan. Can you give us context for this?
Yeah, one of the ways that the practice, I don't know how many people are familiar with mindfulness. Can I see like a show of hands? How many people know what mindfulness is? Some people, and some people don't. Let me just describe a little bit what mindfulness is because there's so many different descriptions and definitions and explanations. So maybe if we start with that, then I can get to don't play the scene before you get there. A lot of what mindfulness is just letting yourself be with what's happening right now in the moment without a layer of baggage or judgment or a preconceived notion. So, the oldest definition of mindfulness is to remember. So, the idea to remember to just stay right here, right now, and not to get ahead of ourselves. Because where we often get a little bit caught up in our own emotions or caught up in worries or start jumping to conclusions before we have all the information, where that often happens is when we get ahead of ourselves. So I was one of the things I did when I was starting out is I read different books about exercises that they do with actors to help them kind of get more connected with their minds and with their bodies. And one of the slogans that they teach actors is don't play the end of the scene before you get there. We don't really know what's going to happen next. We can imagine something's going to happen, but we really can't be sure. So it really makes more sense to let that go and just do the best we can with the information we have in the moment. So that's what don't play the end of the scene before you get there. It's like really stay where you are with the information you have, do the best you can and recognize that there's so many different factors that come into every interaction that we really can't know exactly what's going to happen next, but we can really do the best we can right now with the information we have.
You weave in the golden threads of wisdom from different traditions. Why was this important for you to include in the book?
Well, I mentioned it before, but I think, this kind of a book takes years to write. So I really started writing it 4 years ago. And I'm not a natural writer like some people are. I'm more of a teacher. So what I do is I go in and I teach classes or I teach a training, and then I take notes and I have the manual, and then I turn that into a book. And so because of it, it takes about 4 or 5 years to come up with one of these books. So this book started being developed quite a while ago when in my mind, and I can't speak for anybody else, but the world was a little less polarized, where people were just getting along a little bit better. But now, as more and more going into schools, going into clinics, talking to parents and teachers and seeing the upset the parents have with the teachers, and the teachers are doing the best they can with under the circumstances they have. I just really saw the importance of pointing out to people just how much we have in common and looking at these individual universal themes, like how everything is always changing all the time. So just hold on, and you can be pretty sure something's going to change, or how we're all interdependent and how we're all connected with each other, or how important gratitude and kindness is. Those kind of themes, really talking about them, giving examples, giving activities so that we can heighten our awareness of them, and emphasizing over and over again just that we have these all in common, even if we come from different traditions, even if we have different perspectives and views. These ideas of love and compassion and kindness and generosity and appreciation, all of those views really do have that in common. So trying to focus on what we have in common first, and then we can, once we have some trust, then we can talk about our differences. So does that answer the question? Do you think that makes sense?
I think so. Does anyone have any questions on that? All right.
If
And
anybody
Susan,
has anything they want to mention or say while we're going through, please feel free because I'm here to talk to you. So if anybody has any questions or anything, just raise your hand.
and Susan, I was wondering if we could go back a little bit. Can you describe your journey to your current career, what that
Yeah.
path was for you?
Yeah, well, I was raised in Paw Paw, Michigan with you guys. And I became a lawyer, and I was a lawyer for the first 20 years of my career. And then we had in our household, everybody is fine now, but there was a health crisis in our household. And I was also working as a lawyer, and I was pregnant with my now 33-year-old. No, I was pregnant with my now 31-year-old, and we had a toddler. And I was under a lot of stress. And so I thought I'd learn to meditate. I thought that learning to meditate would help me with my stress. And I didn't have the easiest time of it. The first time I sat down to meditate, I was very pregnant and I couldn't sit still for more than 2 or 3 minutes. I just got up and I left the room. And then I came back and I tried and tried again until finally it became easier for me. So I started meditating to manage my stress as a lawyer. And then the kids got a little bit older, and I was learning most of the exercises or activities or practices I was learning while I was learning about meditation were about attention. And I knew how important attention was in elementary school for my kids. So I thought, oh, maybe I should teach them some of these practices. And I looked for kids' practices at that time, and they just didn't exist. I mean, this was 30, 28 to 30 years ago. So I thought, I'm just going to try myself. So there weren't even like kids' cushions then. So I got a pillow, I got a rubber duck, I got a plastic frog, and my son was interested. And so I had him focus on that. And that's how it started. And that's how I learned the importance of activities, not just asking kids to sit still, but actually asking them, having playing and singing songs and that kind of thing. And then after that happened, I was still practicing law, but I started volunteering in the Boys and Girls Clubs and in some schools. And I wrote this book, and then I was asked to train teachers. And so I moved out of the law practice into this. So that's how I got here. But I'm not one of those people who, was a miserable lawyer. I really liked practicing law. And some of the most mindful people I know are lawyers. So I enjoyed that part of my life, and now I'm enjoying this part.
In your book, there's a lot of terrific practical tips, exercises, and meditations. Can you share how a simple slogan can be transformative? And can you also share a favorite one from the book?
I'll probably repeat this idea a few times because it is truly one of my favorite, but one of my favorite all-time slogans is be grateful to everyone. And that is sort of a general idea that's a good idea, but it's a very specific idea when you're having trouble with your coworker, or if you're having trouble with your spouse or with your sibling or with a friend, or when somebody's causing you a problem, is to consider ways that you can actually be grateful to them. And it changes the mindset, one of being angry or one of being contracted and small, into one that's being more open, and that every situation, even challenging situations, are growth situations. And I think to give this a little bit more context, I'd, I'd like to talk a little bit about the nervous system, because I have to tell you, the one thing I wish I knew as a young mom and young professional 30 some odd years ago was a lot more about the nervous system. And the way the nervous system works, and probably a lot of you know this, but just the way I talk about it with kids and families, is that when we get emotional, when we get excited and worked up, what happens is that's the equivalent of a fight, flight, or freeze reaction. And when we go into fight, flight, or freeze, the energy that we usually use for listening, for critical thinking, for that sort of thing, that energy moves into our body so that we can guard ourselves and protect ourselves. So if you think of when you're feeling overly excited and upset, or when the kids in your life are feeling that, you'll often see a physical tension. People kind of tense up. And that's actually happening because it's a protective measure where we're actually guarding ourselves. So when that happens, we're really not in a good place to be able to reason with someone or to be able to listen or to learn. And I wish I had known that when my kids were little, because I can think of way too many times I tried to reason with them and explain things to them when they were all worked up. And I didn't understand that at that point, they just, all of their energies were going into this kind of survival mode, and they weren't really able to listen and to learn. And the same with my husband of 35 years, the same with my grown kids now, really learning that when we're worked up, it's hard to be able to think clearly. And we talk to this kids about this. We can teach this to little kids very easily, and we do it with this globe. And this is a snow globe, but a glitter ball works as well. And what we do with kids is we say, hey, look at this. Can you see through to the other side? And we'll put something on the other side, like I'm going to put my Paw Paw mug on the other side. And can you see that? And the kids will say, yeah, I can see that. And then we'll say, well, let's imagine that the snow here is the same as kind of stress or big feelings or sad emotions, or even sometimes overexcitement, like happy emotions, what we used to call too much birthday in our household when our kids were little. And when that happens, the snow kind of gets worked up, and can you see through now? And the kids will say, no, we can't see through now. So then we lead them through an exercise where we ask them to put their feet on the floor or their hand on their tummy and just feel the breathing and watch the snow settle and move their attention away from thinking about what they're upset about to watching the snow and feeling the breathing. And look what happens. What happens is the stress and the strain and those big feelings, they tend to settle, and then we can see through again. And we can see through the other side. And now we can see clearly. And now we're able to make decisions and choices that are in our own best interest and in the best interest of those around us. But this is what we also tell the kids. Did the snow go away? And the answer is no. The stress, the strain, the problems we have, they aren't going to go away just by mindful breathing or mindful listening or mindfulness practice. But what mindfulness does do is it gives us tools that when we find ourselves worked up, that we can settle our minds, settle our bodies, and settle our nervous systems so that we can come back to whatever the problem is with a more open mind, a more open heart, and remembering some of these universal themes we were talking about like empathy, looking at things through other people's perspective, sympathy, compassion, kindness, because all of these big ideas, whether it's mindfulness or meditation or any of the big ideas that we read about or hear about, they all sound great, but where they really matter is when we apply them to the small and kind of messy things that happen that we do and say every day. So these tools like mindful breathing, these tools like mindful listening, or if sitting still isn't good, taking a mindfulness walk, getting out into nature, anything where we can move our attention away from what's upsetting us or worrying us into a present moment experience. Remember, don't play the scene before you get there. Just stay right here, right now. That settles our system so that we can deal with the problems, the snow on the bottom of the snow globe, but with a clear mind and an open heart. So that leads into the slogans. And that one of my favorite slogans is to just be grateful to everyone, even people who might be a pain in the neck right now, because it's more expansive, and think of the ways that they might actually be helping us to grow. So I hope that answers the question. It was a little bit of a long answer.
That was wonderful. Thank you. And also another quote from your book is, big ideas can be change makers only if we apply them to the small and sometimes messy things we say and do, which is what you were just saying. What does that mean to you, and how can we start applying it in our daily lives?
Well, for me, I've just spent a lot of time with people who are in mindfulness or meditation or other kind of contemplative practices, who spend a lot of time working with these big ideas. But for me, like I said, some of the most mindful people I've ever met are preschool teachers, because I did a lot of work with preschool kids when I was little. Preschool teachers are incredibly mindful. They're right there in the moment. They know how to settle their minds and bodies. They know how not to be reactive. They tend more toward kindness and compassion. The same with lawyers. I mean, lawyers who are really, good critical thinkers are good at recognizing when their nervous system's on overdrive and settling down. And then you see it in the action. So for me, we can all talk about big ideas. We can all talk about that kind of stuff. But what's important, I think, is the application, seeing how these things are applied in the small pieces of our day. And you see this with kids, and you see this with adults who start playing these games, doing these activities. You do start to see a shift where their perspective broadens and they tend more toward appreciation, tend more toward gratitude, tend more toward listening than being reactive.
So you've been mentioning the games that you've played with the children that you've interacted with, and we have the mindfulness game sets that you sent. Can you tell us a little bit about how you created those? And
Yeah, I mean, we created them. I mean, I created them, like I said, when I started this just wasn't out there. It was often thought of like a California new age woo-woo thing. And so the fact that I was a lawyer, I think helped people take me a little bit more seriously, but also the fact that these games are games and activities that you're probably gonna, some of which you may be familiar with, just put in a different context where they focus on ways that we can help calm ourselves, that we can help connect with each other, that we can build attentional skills in kids in a fun and playful way. So they all start with something playful. We can sing a song, we can play a game, we can toss balls back and forth, but something a little bit playful. And then there's some kind of a practice, and that practice could be something like listening to a tone until the tone fades away. It could be feeling our breathing, but feeling our breathing lying on the floor with a big stuffed animal on our belly, and then watching the stuffed animal go up and down for the little kids, or feeling it for the older kids. Um, it could be doing some walking and like kindness with every step, saying a nice thing about a person with every step, gratitude with every step, saying something you're appreciative of with every step. And then after we play the game, we sit and we talk about it, and we give the children an opportunity to talk about their feelings. And it's amazing the kind of feelings and experiences that kids have with these very simple activities that take between 5 and 15 minutes. And then comes apply. We talk about, okay, how might you use this in real life? So the next time you're on the playground and you're having a problem, or if there's a problem, what might you do? You might walk away and feel your breathing. You might count your breaths. And all of these things are similar to, you might walk away and count to 10, right? Those are the things I was taught when I was growing up, just in more of a context that helps kids understand that these are ways to regulate and to feel better about ourselves. And then, of course, all these games and activities work equally well across the lifespan.
three children myself under 7, and
Oh,
I've noticed the concept of mindfulness being discussed with them also at school, and it's just more prevalent than it was when I was in elementary school. Absolutely. So how do you feel that mindfulness is talked about in society today? Do you feel like it's becoming more accepted? Why?
Oh, when I started this, you couldn't say the word mindfulness or you couldn't say the word meditation in schools. And I went to one school where there was a gardening program, and I just went in with the gardening with the raised beds, but then we'd do a little bit of breathing, and that sort of thing to help kids to learn these skills. So it is getting much more accepted. But like with everything, it's the popularization of something is often a blessing and a curse. So the blessing is it is becoming more popular and more accepted. And the challenge is, what's more difficult is that sometimes mindfulness is oversimplified. I mean, in as it just becomes about breathing, it just becomes about listening. And that's another reason for this book. And if you look back at the other books too, they all talk about these universal themes, because once you have settled down, you want to be able to look at the world in a slightly different way and be able to see it as a much vaster, we're just a tiny, tiny speck in a much vaster, interconnected world where everything is always changing. And that idea of change can really be reassuring to us when things are tough. And so that idea of holding on to our emotions can sometimes feel so tight and so solid, and being able to breathe through them or walk through them or go out in nature or connect with a friend so that things kind of loosen up a little bit. And then we can start to see that, yes, this is difficult, but there's also good. So that idea of we don't ignore our problems. Remember, we've got the snow at the bottom of the snow globe. This is stuff we still are going to have to deal with, but we don't want it to take over our lives. And we want to be able to have some practices that allow us to let this settle. And when it settles, we don't ignore the problems, but we broaden our perspective to help us understand that there's also a lot of good. So we have practices with kids. It's like three good things. And so if the orange juice gets spilled on the counter in the morning and it's upsetting to the child, they got orange juice on their tennis shoes, we acknowledge the feeling. Yeah, that's not great. We're going to clean that up. But we say, hey, how about coming up with three good things too? So this was kind of icky that happened, but let's also remember some good. So it's the idea of working with the problems that we have, but one of the survival mechanisms we have is called a negativity bias, which is we pay more attention to things that scare us than we do things that are good. I mean, that makes sense, right? We're wired to survive, so it makes sense that we're wired to pay more attention to what scares us. But what happens in modern life, as opposed to, way back when, is that sometimes we're just paying way more attention to the small things that don't matter much than the positive things that do matter a lot. And the story I always tell to kind of demonstrate that is, I bet every one of you or your kids or somebody has been at a party where they basically were having a fabulous time and somebody made a nasty comment to them. And on the drive home, what are you thinking about? You're not thinking about all the great things that happened or how generally you had a good time. Our mind tends to focus in, again, that narrowing of the mind toward the snarky or the negative comment. So we don't ignore that happened. We don't deal with whatever we have to deal with, but we try to open up and broaden our perspective to remind ourselves. Remember that oldest definition of mindfulness, to remember? We remind ourselves that, yeah, that was lousy, but there were also these other things there that were good. So that kind of reframing and perspective making, that's another piece of the puzzle of this type of work that is layered upon mindful listening and mindful breathing and that sort of thing. And those are the kind of universal themes that are not unique to mindfulness. They really are woven through all of these different wisdom traditions.
What's one tip you would like to share with us about discovering ordinary magic that's hiding in our everyday life?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that my experience is that there is just so much beauty out there and right around us, and we tend to miss it. We tend to get caught up in this kind of moving forward. We get on automatic pilot. How often have you read a book and then been through a few pages and go, oh, I lost that. I wasn't even following, and have to go back. And we do that in many ways in our life. So the tip I would have is one that I have found really, enriching for me in my life, is that to interrupt my day several times a day to just stop and make a point of looking at something that's kind of cool or kind of extraordinary, and it can be, and the kids do this naturally. I mean, I remember so many times, with my son looking at the crickets in the backyard, or looking at a snail go across a rock, or my daughter, really just getting very involved in the flowers or the garden. They just get completely taken up by these natural beautiful things that are within and around us all the time. And so if we can go back to that kind of childlike wonder, go back to just allowing ourselves to take a minute and just drink up the good, to feel the sun on our face, to feel the wind, to feel the grass on our feet, to be able to just, rest in a chair and enjoy a cup of tea. I've got to tell you, almost all of my work with adults has been with caregivers, and they're either teachers or their parents or their clinicians or other sort of people who care for children or care for seniors or that sort of thing. And the biggest resistance I get from caregivers is this: they will do anything, and I mean almost anything, to help the caregiver, the children in their lives or the people that they're taking care of in their lives. They'll even do something as crazy as try mindfulness or meditation, but ask them to do it themselves. And they say something that just makes a lot of sense. Listen, I would be far more useful if I spent that time cleaning the kitchen, doing the chores, going to work, getting a couple of other hours in, or just spending time playing with my kids. That's a better use of my time. I think taking time out just to care for myself is self-indulgent. I hear that time and time and time again. And how I hope, and if any of you are feeling that way, how I hope you can kind of reframe that and see it a little differently, is to remember that our emotions and that our nervous energy is contagious. And you've all experienced that. I imagine everybody has been in a room enjoying themselves with family or friends, and somebody else has come in and they're in a bad mood and they've completely dampened the party. Or the opposite's true. You can be in a room with people and nothing is really gelling, but all of a sudden somebody comes in and they're cheerful and they're upbeat, and that's contagious, and the whole room, kind of raises up. So if we can do some work on ourselves so that we're a little less reactive, because that's what mindfulness really does. It helps us not snap. It helps us be able to pause, settle, and respond rather than react. If we can be a little less reactive, a little less neurotic, a little kinder, a little more loving, a little more playful, that has this ripple effect. It's contagious on everybody around us, our kids, our partners, our coworkers. And when you tell that to caregivers, when caregivers get a sense, oh, this isn't just some selfish thing I'm doing. By doing this kind of work, I'm actually going to be improving things for other people too. Often that will help people buy in and give themselves some time to take care of themselves. I mean, I'm sure you've all heard, if you're on an airplane, put your own mask on first and take care of yourself before you can help others. This is just an extension of that.
You mentioned a study from the National Institutes of Health that says that gratitude improves a relationship by 26%. What's
Mm.
one tip you can share here in relation to that?
Well, I just think one of the things that often gets lost in talks about mindfulness or meditation or this sort of thing is it really seems like a solo affair, right? We're going to go on a mountaintop, we're going to sit on a cushion, or we're going to go off in a corner, we're going to sit on a cushion, but it's all about doing something yourself. And the same if you're not even talking mindfulness, if you're talking about self-regulation, it's often thought of all of these different things you can do to help regulate yourself. Well, one of the major things that helps with regulation, self-regulation, nervous system regulation, regulation of others, co-regulation, is relationship. Because like I said, there's this kind of contagion that goes on. And so if we can If our nervous system is worked up and we're having a hard time settling down, if we can connect with a loved one who is more settled and grounded, that will help settle and ground us. And if somebody we love or is near us is all worked up, if we stay settled, if we stay grounded and we connect with them, that will help ground them. Because remember, these kind of states of nervous system energy and these kind of states of emotional energy, these kind of things are contagious. So think of extending that to gratitude. And the idea, again, we talked about be grateful to everybody. Think about, even if you're in a situation with a partner or with a child or a coworker, and you're really annoyed with them, and for good reason, we're all people, things get messy. Instead of focusing on what you're annoyed about, once you settle and you don't deny that there's problems. Remember, we do have the problems here. They're still there. Whatever's bothering us or needs to be dealt with is still there. But instead of dealing with that right now, what if you just turn to the person and just say, hey, really thank you for doing the dishes last night. I don't know if I had a chance, but I noticed you did the dishes and thank you. All of a sudden, there's some kind of a shift. So we don't have to express gratitude for big things. Again, that idea we talked about before, the small things we do and say every day. But we can express gratitude for the little things that we just want to let people know have not gone unnoticed. And it is amazing, just amazing, how remembering to say thank you for the little tiny things that are going on that we may not have noticed or just taken for granted really does help improve a relationship.
And what does real life practice look like?
I think real life practice, it looks like what we've been talking about. I mean, formal practice is great, and I have done a lot of formal meditation practice. Formal practice is great. It's like going to the gym and you build up muscles. But again, those kind of muscles really matter when you take them out of the gym and you apply them when you're doing your chores at home, right? So you can go to the gym and get very, very strong, and that's cool and everything, and it's good for your health. But it's a whole different level of usefulness when then you can get home and you can do things that you weren't able to do before, or have more stamina or better health or that sort of thing. The same thing with mental fitness, the same thing with this kind of reflective fitness. We can do these practices on our own, but the real life practice is really learning to notice how you're feeling, when you're feeling it, and not get totally caught up in it. But just if you start noticing that you're feeling a little bit overly excited or upset, you have these tools to help ground yourself. You don't ignore it. You take care of it and you ground yourself. And then you try to drop in to your daily routine these universal themes that are common to all of these traditions. Things like letting go, but not giving up. Things like everything is always changing. Things like all sorts of things are connected. Things like intellectual humility, which for me is probably the biggest one, just recognizing how little we can actually know. That doesn't mean we give up. That doesn't mean we don't try. It doesn't mean we say, oh, why bother? But just recognizing the limitations of what we can know about what's happening with other people. And so not to jump to early conclusions, to try to keep an open mind and to try to listen even when we have differences. So that's it. These aren't big things. It doesn't mean they are big things, but it doesn't have to be big activities or big practices. It's just that oldest definition of mindfulness to remember is just remembering, okay, I'm going to settle myself so that I'm a little less reactive with my kids, with my family. And then I'm going to try to remind myself of these different golden threads and themes that lead to a wiser and more compassionate world and way of being. So I hope that answers that question. It was a little meandering, maybe.
Oh, That's okay. And you've given us so many tips, but is there anything else that you would like to share for adults specifically who are looking to become more mindful or just delve into this practice for the first time?
Yeah, really, really, if you're interested, there's all sorts of great apps if you're interested in apps, great books, there's good teachers. So don't try to go, you can try to do it on your own for a little bit, but don't try to go alone. Find some kind of a community. There, in University of Wisconsin-Madison there's the Center for Healthy Minds, and they've got an app which is really highly regarded, and I believe that it's free, and it has guided meditations. And because it's in the Midwest, I think it might, land with you guys. But there are other ones out there like Calm, that sort of thing. You can read the books. The books I have tips. And then the other thing is, if you bump up against a practice or a teacher, something that kind of gets on your nerves or it doesn't make sense, just skip it. Just skip it and keep going, and keep, paging through until you find something. Okay, this makes sense for me. And start with something that makes sense to you, because all of us are wired differently. Some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts, some of us like to move, some of us like to sit still, some of us have, different ways of analyzing things. So there's so many different activities that help with this type of a practice. And so the idea of paging through a book or trying a few of the practices in an app and seeing if any of them land. And if they don't, pick up a different book, because this has been going on. This type of work has been going on for millennia. So there's all types of people offering different programs, and finding something that resonates with you, that doesn't seem that makes sense, is where I'd suggest you start. And then just stay with it.
Thank you.
Actually, I've got one other tip though. If you have strong emotions when you're practicing, which is very common, because I mean, one of the stories I remember most was when I first started teaching kids. I remember going into the Boys and Girls Club, and it was very active. The kids were running around and we were in a corner and would all sit down. And I really didn't think much would get done. It certainly wasn't a quiet time. And one of the first classes, a little boy sat down. He was an elementary school age boy. And I had just rung a bell and we were sitting and we were practicing some mindful breathing. He hadn't sat still for more than 30 seconds, probably less, that the tears just came. And he just started crying. And it was such an important lesson for me, because it applies not just to kids, but throughout all of our ages. We tend to be so busy, and we tend to push our emotions away or hide some of our emotions with other emotions, that when we actually sit down and are able to drop our shoulders and be with whatever is coming up for us emotionally, sometimes that can be really, really difficult. And there are specific strategies that you can do to help stay with that difficult emotion for a while. One of them is you just count your breath. You breathe, you say one when you breathe in, or in when you breathe in, and out when you breathe out. And then you just kind of focus your mind on that word, in and out, and connect it to your breathing. And that narrows your focus down so that you're not ruminating about all sorts of different thoughts and emotions. Another one is breathe in for 4, hold your breath for as long as you can, and then breathe out for 8. And that too helps lower and settle the nervous system. And then the other is to move. You can just sway from side to side. With kids, we have them shake. And then once I taught it to the kids, I started doing it myself to release a lot of nervous or speedy energy. There are things you can do if you have strong emotions come up. But if those things after a few minutes don't help you settle, please don't white knuckle your way through it. You can just stop and you can take a break and you can come back and try again on another day, because this is a process. It takes time. And there's no reason to push yourself too hard. So that would be another tip I would have.
Yeah. So Susan, that brings me to the end of my questions. Was there anything else that you wanted to share that I didn't ask?
I can't think of anything, but does anybody have any questions in the group?
Tell us about the red wolves.
The what's?
The red wolves.
Susan,
red-
the red wolves.
Oh, the wolves. Oh, yes. Well, can I tell them where I learned the story?
Tell them anything you want. I brought it.
This is a great story. I was back in Grand Rapids 2 years ago, Kate.
One year, last summer.
Last summer, and Katie was at Mary Freebed, and I like to walk, and so I got a hotel that was walking distance from Mary Freebed, but I left after dark, so I wouldn't walk back. So I would get like a Lyft or an Uber or something like that to drive me back. And neither my sister nor George or none of us were very cheerful at the time. It was, we were all a little bit worried. And so I would get in these lifts and go back. And one day this gal picked me up and she said, "How's your sister?" And I couldn't believe that she had remembered me. Apparently she had picked me up earlier. And I thanked her. I said, "Thank you. So few people would think of that. And thank you so much. It really means a lot to me that you remembered." And she told me that her parents and her family gave her a hard time because they thought that she didn't have her feet on the ground and she was too airy-fairy because she was paying attention to that sort of thing. And they actually thought she should go back to school and get a job and that kind of thing. And so we talked a little bit and she asked me, and I said again that I can't really speak for her parents, but I really appreciated the kindness that she was showing me and that I was going to tell my sister when I got to the hospital tomorrow. And so I was thanking her for that. And then she's told me a story that I had not heard before, but it's a very well-known story I learned later. And it is the story of two wolves. And this is how it goes. It's apparently a story from the Native American tradition. Um, and there is a grandfather, and he is taking his grandson out, and they are going for a walk up a small mountain or a big hill, something like that. They get to the top and they look over and they see the community. And the grandson says to the grandfather, "What is it? Why is there so much division? Why is there so much polarization? Why don't people get along? I don't understand it in this community. We're looking at it so beautiful, but why aren't people getting along?" And the grandfather said, "I want to tell you the story of the two wolves. And the story goes like this. There are two wolves living inside of us. One wolf is angry all the time, is mad all the time, is mean all the time, and is very, very difficult to be around. The other wolf is kind, is helpful, is friendly, and these two wolves are inside us all the time, the kind wolf and the mean wolf or the angry wolf, and they're always fighting." And the grandson says to the grandfather, "Which one of the wolves wins the fight?" And the grandfather says, "The one you feed," which I thought was such a powerful story. And it goes to this idea again of the universal themes. If we take these moments to pause and to drop into a brief moment of awareness, and when our nervous systems are settled and we feel more grounded, if we incline our mind toward the good, toward kindness, toward compassion, toward connecting with people, toward the nice little things we can do and say every day, if we incline our mind toward that, then our mind will naturally grow in that direction. And that's feeding the good wolf or feeding the kind wolf. So that's the story of the two wolves.
Thank you for sharing. Were there any other questions?
I have a question. We're all readers here, presumably, we're at least library people. And I think you mentioned about taking care of yourself and your daughter in the garden. Does reading fit in with mindfulness?
Oh, yes. In fact, I have especially with kids, but um I know that because that's my expertise, but I have a book list of over 100 books, none of which are mindfulness books, all of which are kind of old-fashioned picture books or low word or wordless books that actually illustrate these themes. So a lot of this reading, like knitting, all of those things do help to ground our nervous system, right? They move our attention away from ruminating or thinking about our problems into a present moment experience. And reading is one of those things. And reading is also a terrific practice to help build attention in kids and adults. So absolutely. And then if you're working to try to help feed that kind wolf, or feed our children and our communities with these ideas that more aligned with the universal themes, there is a wealth of children's picture books. In fact, I'll share them with my sister, my list with my sister, and she can share them with you, of children's picture books and many of them are low word books, which is important if you're dealing with the different languages or young children, that really do reinforce themes of open-mindedness, of intellectual humility, of how everything changes, how everything's connected, and the kind of nervous system regulation strategies that I've been talking about tonight. So thank you for that question. Yes, for the library. And if you're interested in that book list, I'll share it with Katie and she can pass it along.
That would be great. Thank you. Anyone else? I think we're good with the question, Susan. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. I know it's work to put something like this together and work to come out on a cold night in the fall with the holidays around the corner. So I appreciate you coming and thank you.
Oh, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.